Over the past few weeks, you will have no doubt been flooded with information, tips and how-tos regarding looking after your mental health during lockdown. And whilst it's great to have so many resources at your fingertips, it can also be hard to navigate through all of the different channels of information. And how do you know whether the advice you're reading is from a trusted source or even that it's the right advice for you? So we've been hosting a series of webinars over the last few weeks that have focused on different topics and tried to address a whole range of things that people might be struggling with during this period of isolation. So we wanted to put together this session to go through some of the key practical advice that we've given for looking after yourself and others during the pandemic. All of this advice is based on and complies with information provided by the World Health Organization, as well as sound clinical research. So we're going to be starting by just looking at some of the key risk factors to wellbeing during a pandemic. We'll then go on to the kind of practical tips that we recommend following in line with government guidelines, and also give you some information for how you can support yourself and others. So what are the key risks? Well, arguably one of the biggest risk factors to our mental health during this time is stress. Stress is a physical response that occurs when we feel that the demands placed on us outweigh the resources we feel we have to deal with them. Now, it's completely normal to feel stressed and worried at times, and stress can sometimes be really helpful, for example, for adaptation, for building resilience, and also for staying motivated. Often our response to a stressful situation is largely determined by how familiar we are with it and how prepared we are to feel to deal with it. So COVID-19 is a great example of that. It's not something that we have ever had to deal with before for most of us. And it's also something that is outside of our control. Now, when we don't know what the outcome of the situation will be, it is quite unsettling. And we can, as a result, feel more worried, feel more stressed. And this is completely normal. Where it does become potentially damaging, however, is if this stress is sustained and you start becoming distressed by worrying or negative thoughts.
Yeah, so as Emily said, so really stress is based on our personal experience, and some of us are more prone due to their biological background as well, or the support system they have available. So this is a key factor as well, which highly influences how we perceive stress. We all have our individual threshold. So the great thing actually, if we see it in a positive way, is that stress is perceived. So we are able to change the perception of it. And there are great psychological strategies, which we will touch on later, which you can learn to really control your thoughts and emotions and bodily responses to the stressor.
Yeah, exactly. Brilliant point, Hannah. The next part is social isolation. Many of us have friends and family that we either live with or can stay connected to via technology. In fact, many people are connecting more with people now than they normally would. But there are also situations where someone may be completely isolated for whatever reason. Elderly people are probably at a higher risk of feeling isolated, as well as people with mental health conditions. But this could also apply to anyone. So it's important to not only be mindful of other people's situations and offer support where you can, but also to ask for help if you yourself feel like you don't have any support or social interaction. Financial pressure will also be impacting a lot of us during the pandemic. People have been faced with losing their jobs, being furloughed, or having to support family members who are facing financial burden. Recent surveys from before the pandemic even came about have shown that financial pressures are actually one of the biggest contributors to poor mental health in the UK. And in many cases, financial insecurity can seem impossible to get away from. So it's really important to strengthen other attributes in your life that you do have a bit more control over, that can help you to remain resilient during financial hardship.
Yeah, so really try not to panic about like any financial issue, but rather stay focused and really identify financial stressors and make a plan on them. So how you could reduce expenses or be more efficient, or just review regular regular expensive. So really try to find a healthy way of coping with your way of how you deal with financial stressors. So if you reach out to more negative ones like alcohol or eating way too much, or that you feel unhealthy, so really identify how you deal with it. And if you can't deal with financial stressors, there are great ways you can seek support as well. So yeah, use it, and don't feel that there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, exactly. Finally, health stigma is also a significant risk, especially during this pandemic. Health stigma essentially happens when a person is labelled according to their illness or risk of illness, which can cause further isolation of that individual or group, and even worsen their condition. During the pandemic, people who are at risk of health stigma might include healthcare workers, people with underlying health conditions, and of course, people with coronavirus. Many people may avoid healthcare workers due to fear of becoming infected, or they might avoid the elderly or people with other conditions, for example, because they are worried about passing on the infection. Without realising it, this is actually a form of health stigma and can make people at the receiving end feel extremely isolated, even though that is not the intention. So being aware of some of these risks is the first step to actually managing them and preventing them from having a significant impact on you during the pandemic. We'll now look at what some of the outcomes could be of these risks. So the risks that we've just explored can have both direct and indirect effects on important aspects of our life, one being our health. Mental health is significantly associated with physical health, and often physical and mental health conditions coexist. So in other words, if your physical health is poor, you're at higher risk of experiencing issues with your mental health and vice versa. Your relationships may also become affected by social distancing or isolation. Stress and worry can impact the way that we respond to people, which can create tension or even result in conflict. And some people may even isolate themselves from other people if they're feeling down. Health stigma, whether it's intentional or not, can also foster feelings of resentment. Finally, many people are being forced to adapt to new ways of working, which can also have an impact on your productivity and performance. This can cause you to feel more stressed and impact your work ability further, and this cycle continues. So now we're going to look at how to stay on top of your mental health and well-being, and this is based on solid advice that we have based on research that we've done, but also through trusted sources like the World Health Organization. So first of all, we're going to cover how to tackle stress and worry. Limit your exposure to the news. Try and pick one or two reputable sources, such as the BBC or the World Health Organization, just to stay up to date with the situation. But try and limit yourself to receiving news to maybe once a day, perhaps first thing in the morning or towards the end of your day, for example, at the briefing at 5 p.m. Try not to do this too close to bedtime, because if you do read anything that is particularly worrying or distressful, it can then impact your quality of sleep. Try and avoid information from social media and limit your time spent on it. Social media is a really great way of staying connected with people during this period of social distancing and isolation, but it's also rife with a lot of negativity and false information. Copy and pasted advice on WhatsApp groups or Facebook, for example, are a significant concern. They are often attributed to, for example, a friend's friend who's a doctor. If you're not sure that the whole post is true or that the source is unidentifiable, then it's worth being skeptical and not sharing it on. The best thing you can do is to not reshare any information that is not from a trusted source. Similarly to the news, try and limit the amount of time you spend on social media. Stay connected to people. We have the power of technology, so you can use video chats, which I know a lot of people are doing, which has been fantastic to see, especially where work is concerned. It can be really easy to slip into the habit of emailing or just doing direct messenger or calling, but try and make an effort to hold as many of your meetings or team catch-ups over video. You could get also quite creative. We've seen lots of virtual cafes or lunch breaks with friends, teams and families. Do be mindful here though, because the risk of the other risk of social media is, which I've been noticing over the past few weeks, is that it could have also the potential to make someone feel even more isolated. Not everyone will have big groups of friends or close family that can come up with creative ways of keeping entertained during the lockdown. And if you're one of those people, seeing other people's posts about group quizzes or family games, for example, could actually make you feel more socially isolated. So again, this comes back to the point of perhaps limiting your social media use, because you can still keep in touch with people on Messenger or WhatsApp or just by phoning them. And social media can also be quite misleading in many cases, where people may portray only what's good in their life, which can create kind of a false sense of someone's experience. And be strict about giving yourself time to do things that you enjoy every day. And that could be reading, it could be exercising, it could be cooking. Most of you will have saved time on commuting by being forced to work from home. So try and use that time creatively and don't use it to work. You might also want to set yourself some small goals to work towards, but make sure that they're manageable and achievable. For me personally, at the beginning of the lockdown, because I'm someone that likes going to the gym and I obviously couldn't do that anymore, I gave myself a goal of being able to run for 30 minutes without stopping. It's a small goal and it's manageable, but it gave me something to work towards. And it gives you something outside of work as well. And if you're someone that likes routine or likes to feel like you're working towards something, then having little goals like that can really make a big difference. The next part is about health. So obviously stay active and eat well. I'm sure many of you who have access to gyms or PTs, you'll see that most of them have been posting videos on home workouts. You can also access lots of resources on YouTube or even just make them up yourself. And obviously going for a walk or a run, especially if you live somewhere that's close to a park or countryside, but just make sure that the current government guidance allows it. If you want to get children involved as well, and this is something that some parents are having challenges with because they want to keep themselves active, but they also have children that probably have a lot of energy built up. Jo Wicks, the body coach, has been producing some really great workouts for children and parents, and you can find those on YouTube.
Yeah, so really the physical exercise is really important because it helps you also to release the stress. So when we're stressed, we get the fight or flight response, which Emily mentioned before, and we don't really use it. So it's kind of like still in our system and in our body, and releasing this energy with exercise really helps us to kind of reset our body again. So this is a great technique to really get to the baseline again and release the tension and just the energy which we have from the stressor itself.
Yeah, exactly. Maintain good sleep hygiene. Sleep is an important restorative process and is really crucial for maintaining physical and mental health. So simple things like sticking to a similar sleep routine, avoiding stimulants like caffeine, tobacco and alcohol close to bed are really good habits to stick to. If you find that more often than not, you find it hard to get to sleep because of your thoughts, if they're racing, or maybe you get woken up by them in the middle of the night and can't get back to sleep, there are different strategies that you can try, which we'll explore in more detail a bit later on.
Yeah, coming here again to like sleep schedule and sleep routine, they're really important, especially like as humans being creatures of habits. So our circadian rhythm is really aligned with a specific time, and so it really helps if you go to bed and wake up always at the same time, even though maybe we miss out the way to the tube now and could actually get up a bit later, but it really helps you if you do that always the same. And also kind of like creating the optimal environment can be really helpful for you. So making it quiet, cold, and not using any artificial light, especially the blue light is really helpful for that, and practicing relaxation techniques before bed as well. So we will come back to that as well, but deep muscle relaxation or calm breathing are great techniques which really help you to kind of release the tension and to make you feel asleep very easily. I always use the deep muscle relaxation, for example, which helps me a lot.
So do I. And obviously there is a caveat to that. If you're working shift patterns, that can be quite difficult to obviously maintain a regular sleep schedule. But there are other things that you can do. We're actually doing a couple of sleep workshops over the next couple of weeks. So we've got one tomorrow and next Friday, I believe, as well, with our CEO, who's a consultant psychiatrist as well. So if you're interested in learning a bit more about sleep and some of the things that you can do, those sessions will be really good. The next one is to establish clear boundaries between work and home life as much as possible, because it's really important to make sure that you can switch off at the end of the day. You may want to set limits around checking your emails, for example. We all have those evenings where we need to meet a deadline, but it's important to dedicate some time during your day where you don't think about work. You could ban yourself from checking your emails after 8:30, for example, but ask yourself, if you do receive an email outside or in the evening or first thing in the morning, ask yourself, is the company going to fall apart if I don't reply to this email right now? Clear cuts, I mean, most often it won't. So clear cuts will help you to draw boundaries and set you in a good routine for work.
Yeah, and this can be quite easy, like just putting on some clothes for work. It doesn't need to be a suit, but something different than your jogging pants, for example, or having a specific place where you work, and then later putting your laptop away and not using the equipment again. So like those tiny cues which help you to set the boundary between switching off and having free time and doing your work is really helpful. And also routine can be really helpful, so especially if you have children. So for children, the key is really to have the structure and routine, and so having meals at the same time during lunchtime. So making your work schedule in line with your for example, your routine and your just your structure over the day can be very helpful to kind of set the boundary as well, and help your children, for example, to really know, okay, now it's time for work, or you're not available, but they know at 12 o'clock you will come out and have lunch with them, for example. So those are the tiny cues which might be really helpful for you managing this time.
Yeah, and you may have to be flexible with your schedules. I know that a lot of people that we've been working with have had to now adjust the way that they work because of having young children at home.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be that you have to start work earlier in the morning and then have a break during the middle of the day to spend time with your children or help them with homework, and then come back to it later on in the day, and that's completely fine. I think the point here is just to make sure that, like we said, you do have that clear boundary and you're not just dipping in and out of work throughout the day and kind of going first thing in the morning and late at night, because it really does start to blur the lines between switching off and being at work and being on your game.
Yeah, and communicating those as well, like with your family, but also with your line manager, for example. So letting them know you need a bit longer lunch breaks, for example, because you need to cook. So just having this communication and the making everyone aware, and just aligning your work schedule can be really, really good for that.
Yeah. The next part is about problem solving. So we've talked about worries, and a big factor in worries is that sometimes they can just occupy your thoughts for the whole day. If you've got something that you are worried about or you're feeling stressed about, then it can be really, really hard to stop that from impacting on other things that you're trying to do, especially things like work, and it can really impact your productivity. So there are things that you can do that are practical and that may feel a bit bizarre or uncomfortable at first, but that once you kind of work these into your routine, they can have a really, really positive impact. So the first thing is called worry time. If anyone was on my session about anxiety and worry during unsettling times, you'll know what this is, but for anyone that isn't, worry is sometimes hard to control. So rather than trying to stop it altogether, one of the techniques is to schedule some time in your day called worry time. And this is where you have time to think about what you're worried about. So it means giving yourself permission to put off thinking about any worries until later in the day. So the idea is that anytime a worry comes to mind, take a minute to write down 1 or 2 words about it, maybe on your phone or a piece of paper, and just write down the topic of your worry, not any details. During the day, when new worries come up, you might want to just simply add them to your lists. Then think about when, where, and how you're going to deal with them. So schedule a time when you'll be able to do this undisturbed, and choose a place that you don't spend a lot of time relaxing, maybe the kitchen, for example. The idea is to avoid worry becoming linked to a place of relaxation or sleep. So try not to do this before bed or in bed. When planning this time, try and limit it to no more than 30 minutes. And once you've planned this, you can let go of your worries for now, because you'll come to deal with them later at a specific time. So it allows you to refocus your attention on the present moment and distract yourself from what you're worried about. When it gets to this worry time, set a timer for 30 minutes, for example, and take out your list and work through them one by one. Allow yourself to think about everything you're worried about. And if you come across something that's no longer relevant, then just cross it off your list. As you do this, and the more you do this, you'll start to sort them into things that you can do something about and things that you can't. And those that you can do something about, you can either make a brief plan to deal with them or schedule some time in the future when you can deal with them effectively. Once this time is up, you want to just try and let go of the worries and focus back on the present. Repeat this process every time something new comes up. And whilst this exercise doesn't necessarily solve your worries, what it does do is limit the amount of time you spend thinking about them, meaning they don't overwhelm you. So this is a really good exercise if you do find it hard to switch off worrying thoughts and focus on what you're doing in that particular moment. This can be a really good one to try. The next one is to ask yourself, then what? So often worries are hypothetical. What if I don't get the promotion? What if I lose my job? What if I get ill and can't work? And it's really common to get stuck at the worst part of the scenario without thinking what would happen next or what we would do about it. So try and get into the habit of thinking, then what? By facing worries this way, i.e. thinking about what you would do and how you would cope, it can really take some of the heat off. And when we work through our thoughts in this way, we often realise we could cope better than we initially expected. It might also help you to troubleshoot and talk things through with a friend, family member, or your manager. Again, it can be really easy to slip into a cycle of just ruminating on your worries or thoughts, which can lead to catastrophizing or expecting the worst. Talking through with someone else can really help to alleviate some of the burden, as well as help you to come up with ways of solving it. But do be mindful of who you're talking to. Some people aren't going to be the best forms for particular topics, because they may actually make the situation worse by catastrophizing or by trying to tell you what to do. Also, especially where sensitive subjects such as money are concerned, we might also avoid talking about it due to fear of being judged or shamed. But remember that in many cases, this is just our own negative self-talk, presuming that we know what the outcome of the scenario will be. There will, of course, be instances where it isn't possible or appropriate to talk to someone in your immediate network. So this is where you might be better to seek support from external services, such as your employee assistance program, if you have one, or telephone helplines. Next, we will talk about some psychological strategies. If you already do all of the things that we've just talked about and still find it hard to switch off or manage your stress, or just want to learn some other things that you can do, it might be a good idea to start incorporating some of these strategies into your routine. So we'll have a look what they are. First of all is meditation and mindfulness. Sometimes we can get stuck worrying about things that are in the past or in the future, which takes us away from what is happening right now. The practice of mindfulness is all about learning how attention gets captured by thoughts, particularly worries, learning how to notice how this process happens, and then learning that you don't need to engage with them if you don't want to, which means that you achieve more conscious attention control. The idea of mindfulness is allowing yourself to acknowledge a feeling or a thought, but then letting it pass by without getting stuck over and over in your head, because this can cause more stress and distract you from other important things.
Yeah, so really mindfulness is not about judging yourself, not for not being able to focus on the present, but really rather about like creating an awareness of your thoughts and feelings. And it may help you to give them like a label. This is an emotion like anxiety, or this is a concern about my health. And there are various ways you can be mindful. So in the app, you have the option for guided or unguided meditation, which I recommend for starting meditation. Guided might be a bit more helpful. But as I said, just try to shift your attention to, for example, sensation at the moment. So you don't need to do it with the app, but you can do it just during your lunchtime, for example. And we cannot keep up that the whole day, but maybe you just want to set yourself a specific time where you try to be a bit more mindful, like during lunchtime, as I said. So having the sensation of your the food in your mouth, or just the sun in your face. So there are various ways you can be mindful, and just try out what you like and what suits you well.
Yeah, and obviously we've mentioned the app here. There might be some people on here that don't have access to the Thrive app, but there are heaps of resources that you can get access to help you practice meditation and mindfulness. And it is practice, it is a skill. So it takes some time to build that up. But some people do find mindfulness quite hard to start with. That I certainly do. So there are different ways to relax and switch off, which have the same benefits. And these include deep breathing or calm breathing, progressive or deep muscle relaxation, and applied relaxation are some examples. All of these exercises focus on the mind-body connection, which can be a great place to start. There is a very, very clear mind-body connection in stress and worrying. So sometimes if we can't control our mind, it's easier to gain control of the sensations in the body and control them that way. So for example, progressive muscle relaxation is the process of tensing different muscle groups in your body for around 5 to 10 seconds, then releasing the tension, and you're prompted to notice the difference between tense and relaxed. And it really, really helps to induce a relaxed state. And used about an hour before bed has been shown to be very, very powerful in improving your sleep, because again, you're focusing on how you're feeling in your body rather than the thoughts that are going on in your head. So this is a particularly good technique. Similarly with calm breathing, it's a process of deep breathing in deeply for about 3 seconds, holding the breath, and then breathing out. And you do this for a minimum of 3 minutes. You need to do it for 3 minutes in order for it to have any effect. But again, you can induce a relaxed state. And because you can do it quite quickly and it's very, very easy to learn, if you find yourself in a situation where you are feeling quite overwhelmed or stressed, or you feel yourself maybe getting panicky, you can use these techniques very, very quickly and without any guidance that can help to put your body out of fight and flight and back into that relaxed state. So our app, if you have access to it, has a variety of these techniques which you can try, and all of them have years of research. We also, as Johanna said, offer various versions of concentration meditation and 2 sessions more focused on mindfulness. Self-suggestion is another exercise in the app, and it's more about making a strong link between a state of relaxation and a thought or image so that you can bring about the relaxation state quickly. But all of these require practice, but we do have a bit more time on our hands at the moment, so I believe it's very much worth your while to give them a go. CBT, or cognitive behavioural therapy, is also a really great tool to use. Sorry, that's the door. CBT aims to teach people the skills to understand how thoughts can influence feelings and therefore behaviour. So we have a CBT program in the app, but outside of that, it does require a GP referral. But it can be used as a tool to differentiate between helpful thoughts, which help you to adapt and cope with situations, from unhelpful thoughts, which are those ones that you get stuck and ruminating on. So it gives you that skill set for catastrophizing and giving you that answer to, well, then what would I do? In many cases, it is possible to manage stress and worry without the assistance of professional support. So starting to be aware of these processes and the tools that you can use to build your resilience and respond effectively to stressful situations will help you to protect your mental health and also enable you to support others. But there will, of course, be times where you may need to seek external support. So if you're worried about someone you know, it can sometimes be hard to know what to do or how to help. Sometimes we may avoid the conversation entirely because we're scared of making things worse or not knowing how to respond. Some key things to remember are, are that everyone's response to stress is different. There is no right or wrong way to react to stress, especially not in this kind of situation. So it's important to be mindful that not everyone will react in the same way as you or in a way that you're familiar with. Experiences of mental health are also different. So if you're trying to support someone that is going through mental health difficulties, try and remain patient, listen to them non-judgmentally, and offer to support them to seek help if they haven't already. Try and avoid telling them what to do. For example, you should do this because it worked for my friend, as an example, because they may not respond to it, and this could actually make things worse, especially if it doesn't help. You don't need to be an expert in mental health to help others. Often, simply being there for someone and asking if they're okay can be of immense benefit. And finally, lead the conversation. If you notice a team member or a friend or family member is starting to withdraw socially or doesn't reach out much, try to avoid jumping to the conclusion that they're just disinterested or busy. Perhaps try reaching out privately and just checking in, and actually ask how they're doing and how they're coping with the situation and so on. And addressing it in this way can sometimes get a different response. The next part we want to cover is actually when to seek support, and this can be quite a challenging thing. We're all very, very good at helping other people, but sometimes we're not so great at helping ourselves, and we may not even notice that we are feeling a certain way or that it may be time to get support before it's starting to actually impact your day-to-day life. So there may, of course, be instances where you're not able to manage stress independently and may require external support. And I should at this point say that the earlier you seek support, even if it's initially from someone close to you, the better. Where you may look to external support is if your thoughts or feelings are distressing and this lasts for more than 2 weeks, or if things are getting worse. You may experience physical symptoms too, like chest pain or increased heart rate, headaches, pins and needles, nausea, extreme fatigue, disruptions to your menstrual cycle, or changes in appetite or other sleep disturbances. Sometimes physical symptoms can actually precede psychological ones. So if you experience any unusual symptoms, it might be a sign that you're affected by stress and can do with some support. And don't let this go on. Physical symptoms are usually something that gives you a really clear indication that something else is going on. So it's really important that you address that early on.
Yeah, there's one point which I would like to add again to the supporting others. Don't judge yourself. Like if you feel you can't handle someone, for example, having really difficulties, it's completely okay. So if you feel it's too much for you, really don't think that you kind of like leave your friend or colleague or family member alone, but maybe talk to them that you don't really know how to support them, or just, yeah, try to seek the conversation as well and take care of yourself. So it's completely okay that you do your own stuff sometimes as well. You can't treat them, or you can't eliminate their problems. So taking care of yourself anytime is really important for that. And yeah, just allowing yourself to do something nice for yourself as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Johanna. So just to recap then, the purpose of this session was to summarise the key risks to mental health and wellbeing during COVID-19, as well as some of the key advice to help you stay mentally well during this period of time. It can be really easy to get swept up by stories or anecdotes of people's experiences, and we can sometimes lose track of what's actually best for us as an individual. So remember to maintain a healthy lifestyle, be strict about setting boundaries between home and work life, stay socially connected, but equally don't feel pressured that you have to achieve something during this time. It's perfectly acceptable to take this opportunity to enjoy a slower pace of life. Try not to get stuck on worrying thoughts and proactively problem solve or speak to other people to help you troubleshoot issues. Try relaxation or mindfulness techniques to help you switch off and manage stress. And these can be particularly helpful for managing both the physical and psychological symptoms. Support others simply by being there and offering them a non-judgmental and empathetic ear. and seek support from external services like your GP, the NHS 111 phone line, or services offered by your organisation if you find that stress, worries, or negative thoughts are causing you distress and impacting your day-to-day life. So we hope you found that session useful, and thanks for your time this morning. We want to open up for any questions. So we'll give you a few minutes to write down any Q&A that you have, and then we'll work through those one by one. If you don't have any questions, then that is absolutely fine. You can dial off, and thank you for joining. But we will stay on the webinar for a few more minutes just to allow for anyone that wants to submit a question. I should say as well that in the screen recording of this, the Q&A stays blank. So when we share the recording, you won't actually see the Q&A come up. So it's completely fine if you want to ask something, it will stay anonymous.
There's a question, is there any specific advice for clinical staff who aren't based at home? I guess that's quite difficult in terms, I guess probably you're faced with a lot of like worries concerning your health and anxiety, and I guess really focusing on this like worry time, which Emily mentioned before, can be really helpful. So calming yourself down, facing your worries, taking a specific time to write them down as well, really helps us to kind of get perspective on their specific threat to ourselves. So this can be a great technique.
I think social support is something that is going to be really helpful during time, especially for people that are working on the front line and are immediately in the heart of what's going on at the moment. So I think that if you can have the social support around you, I've got friends that work on the front line, and they've found that the social support has been particularly helpful. But it's challenging because there are things, again, like we said, that are entirely outside of your control. And it's just about being able to accept that there are some things that you aren't going to be able to control. And yes, they may be worrying and they may be stressful, but they're not worth the time spent on continuously ruminating on how they're making you feel if you can't actually solve them or do something about it. So as Johanna said, this is where things like the worry time or being able to do exercises where you can switch off will help. We've got another question. How do you explain COVID-19 to children who can't make sense of the news or enormity of the situation? I want to just start by saying that we're not child psychologists, so I'm going to give sort of my opinion and general advice on this. There are support services online. I believe that the World Health Organization and also the NHS and government have helpful resources, especially for parents. But I think that actually just having a mindful conversation with them and trying to simply explain what is going on. Children aren't stupid. They know when things are changing, and it can be very easy to kind of slip into trying to shield them from what's going on. And this can indirectly put a lot of pressure on you as a parent and can impact how you're feeling, which will obviously have a ripple effect. So I think just actually trying to be honest with them. I think a lot of schools and nurseries are doing things virtually now, so at least they can have some interaction with their friends. And it's just a really good opportunity to actually spend time with your children outside of kind of normal life where you're busy at work, for example. Johanna, I don't know whether you have anything else to add on that, but
no, I think like communication is a key thing here, and really talking about your emotions as well. So children learn about your emotions while you model them, or like while you show them how you respond to them. So really letting them know that you maybe are angry about something specific, or that you feel guilty, just anything, but they learn from how you model and how you explain it to them. So really having this mindful open conversation and talking about emotions can be both positive and negative, and really expressing your feelings is really helpful for them, and it will help them to build their communication skills as well. So just yeah, having this repeated and regular talking to each other, especially in this time where they maybe not have the chance to speak with their peers in school, for example. So taking more time in this time and talking to your children can be really helpful, and maybe depending on their age, but helping them to kind of get connected to their friends as well. So maybe you can help them to kind of like connect through a Skype chat or anything, just supporting them that they can have the connection as well to their friends and yeah, to their students. So we have another webinar on how parents can support children, so maybe you want to have a look in this one as well. It should be on the YouTube channel, which we have.
Yeah, yeah, we've had another question about setting boundaries for children. So I think that the parental support webinar would be good for that. Now, I do appreciate, obviously, the strategies that we've talked about today are very good in theory, and sometimes it's easy to implement them, but other times, if you have lots of things going on around you, or you've got particularly young children, it is going to be hard to create strict routines. And I think that's just where you have to have a clear line of communication with your work. Most people are in very similar situations, especially if they have young children. And I've had some of our clients, for example, just giving us a heads up and saying, during this period of time, I may not be as easy to contact. But it's just, I think everyone can appreciate that people are in a difficult and unusual situation at the moment. So it's trying to set realistic expectations for both yourself and your children and your employers. If you're finding it extremely difficult to manage the two, then having a conversation with your employers, and also seeing if any family members that you live with can help kind of alleviate some of that burden or pressure, can help as well. Have you got any specific advice on how to reduce stress and anxiety in children during the pandemic, or how to talk to them about it? Again, we have done a session on supporting your children. With regards to talking to them, we've just covered that again, having a mindful conversation. But I think that there are lots of resources. Again, we aren't child psychologists, so I don't feel like I want to particularly give any specific advice on that. However, if you have access to the app, it's completely safe to use over the age of 14 by themselves. All of the techniques in there are absolutely fine. Anyone under the age of 14, you can still use the app with parental guidance, and that's just because of the understanding the language. But all of the relaxation sessions in there are perfectly fine for children, because they don't require any kind of understanding of mental health or anything like that, and they are particularly safe for them. So you maybe try doing one of the calm breathing sessions or a couple of other of the exercises with your children, and that can be a good way as well as keeping them entertained.
Yeah, also like just being clear and within communication, like for example, if you want to set the boundaries and tell really communicate to your child, like for example, from 9 to 12, you really need to work, and you will shut the door, and they know the time that at 12 you will come out again for them and maybe have lunch together, so that they, and repeat this, like have the structure and be consistent with your structure, which really helps children to kind of like be aware when you're available and when not, and they can rely on specific time that they know you will come back to them. So this can really help your child to be, to just be aware of your boundaries and as well. So really communicating these structures and boundaries within your family.
We've had one question saying, what is the evidence for citing the BBC and WHO as trusted information? Both have been shown to be misinforming. I mean, of course, there are loads of resources out there, but the World Health Organization is the key source of information for these things, and bearing in mind that we are in a pandemic that we've not had any experience of. I don't particularly acknowledge information from other news sources because the BBC is the main broadcasting service in the UK. So there's also the NHS and the government website which you can use. Yes, arguably some people may think that part of it is misinforming, but then so is areas like Facebook, for example, or other news sources. So the BBC and the WHO and the World Health Organization, as well as the NHS and the government's website, in terms of all other resources available, they are the best ones for the general public. But you might also want to look, if you're a bit more scientific minded, at some of the research that has been and the reports published by the University of Oxford and Imperial College.
Yeah, just be mindful and really focus on only a specific news channel maybe, and not on thousands of informations in social media.
We've got one that says, I suffer from depression already and I find working from home incredibly hard. Already felt alienated from my colleagues having taken time off, and do find the jolly group chat difficult. Only one person acknowledged my login this morning. Have you got any ideas? My line manager said to join in, but when only one person responds, it is really dispiriting. Completely understand that. I think here, this is where some of the exercises that we've talked about today can really help with that. A lot of it is about our perception and how we feel about certain things, and it's very, very easy to get stuck on negative self-talk, to say things like, I'm not wanted, or there's no point, or I shouldn't bother. So learning how to actually acknowledge whether a particular thought might actually be unhelpful in a situation, and that's where we talked about those kind of adaptation and coping thoughts versus ruminating thoughts, can be really helpful to that. So if you've got access to the app, the CBT program is a very good place to start. It's very simple and it breaks it down. But also, again, having that ability to be mindful and have control over your attention. But equally, do not feel pressure to join in on group activities. As I said earlier, some people are really, really outgoing and sociable, and they want to get involved in things like this. But you should never feel pressure to join in on group calls or group things because you feel like people will look down on you if you don't. You can just simply say, I'm not going to join in this morning, if that's okay. I've got other things to do, and that's completely fine. And just keep that open line of communication with your line manager, for example, or if it's with friends and family like that, so that they don't feel that there's anything to worry about, for example. So I hope that is helpful. It's very difficult to give any specific personal advice on that, but as general guidance, the CBT program is a very good place to start. We've also got a question, do you have any advice on dealing with bereavement during these times? We actually did a session on bereavement last week, which has been recorded and is on the YouTube channel. We will be sending a link to the YouTube channel along with the recording for this session afterwards, so I'd recommend watching that, because we do go into a lot of detail, and it's probably it's a bit too much to go into today.
Yeah, and it can just be really helpful to understand the grieving process, which we discuss in there as well. So I outlined quite some useful tips on how you can deal with bereavement, but also I really would like to encourage you to understand a bit more of the emotional processes which we experience during bereavement. So this webinar is I think is a really good thing to watch.
Yeah. Finally, as I live with my partner, and sometimes he wants space in this time, as do I. Oh, where's that question just gone? And we have separate activities, but sometimes I feel very isolated and withdrawn. How would you recommend a healthy balance for spending time together? This is difficult because it's going to change for everyone. So I can't give you any specific advice on what a healthy balance is, because what is going to be healthy for one couple is not going to be the same for another. Again, I think this can also come down to being influenced by things you see on social media. A lot of people are very rightly so posting about things that they're doing with their partners or with their families, and sometimes it can actually have the effect on making you think, oh, maybe we should be doing more together. So be mindful of that. I think if that's how you're feeling, the key there with any relationship and with any issue is communication, and actually just having a very open and honest conversation about how you're feeling, and asking what he needs as well, and discussing what you need from each other. It can be very easy to get stuck in a routine of almost assuming that someone doesn't want to spend time with you, or assuming that you know what their answer is going to be. And that's where you can start to get stuck and again have that kind of negative self-talk. So just have a conversation with him, I think, is the first step to dealing with that. Is there any advice for single parents with an only child? I think the supporting, the parental support webinar would be a good one, but there's also resources online. I think this is very, very difficult because, again, you're the only person that is in the house with their child, and it's going to be difficult. So you have to be realistic with yourself about what you can and can't do. The likelihood is if you have a 9-to-5 job, you're probably not going to be able to do as much of the work now as you would if you were working normally and your child was in daycare, for example. So you've got to be realistic and not set too many expectations on yourself for being able to balance the two, because that's not going to happen. So again, have a conversation, make sure that you're having clear lines of communication with your employer. Most employers should be offering some kind of flexibility, especially during this time. So before you start getting yourself worried about how you're going to manage both, try and just be realistic and have that conversation. And also talk to, if you've got friends or family that also are in a similar situation to yourself, it might be worth just asking them what they're doing, and reach out to them. They might have some different ideas. And there's lots of online resources as well. Like I said, the Joe Wicks body coach is doing PE classes for children. So you might want to set them up in the living room with your TV and get them to do that on their own or do it with you. And that can, as we've said earlier, relieve some stress. So I hope that's helpful, but also have a look online at some different resources as well. Okay, well, I think that was all of the questions. So I hope everyone found that useful, and we'll share the recording with you later on within the next 24 hours. So thanks everyone for your time, and Johanna, thanks for joining in as well.
Thank you very much and have a nice day. Bye.